Welcome to my channel, and welcome to another episode of God Talks. This is a live stream that I do every Friday, beginning at 12 a.m. UTC. And I talk about the Bible, about Christian living, about walking by the Spirit. Excuse me. Excuse me. About walking by the Spirit, and I handle questions from the chat if there's anyone who has any questions, and I can answer them. I don't know if I can, but we'll try. I want to cover a couple things before I get started on today's information. The first thing is I have a lung disease, and so that causes me to cough. I've got 2 anesthetic cough drops in my mouth right now to try and help suppress the cough, but as you can see already, it doesn't work perfectly. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. Last week, I had a couple of people mention things they wanted me to look at. One was Tommy Tiernan, Mass. And I have to say that I went and watched that, and I found him absolutely hilarious. I thought he was funny as all get out. So that was very enjoyable. Thank you for pointing that out to me. And then the other thing was someone mentioned Bishop Mari Emanuel. And I have to confess that I had seen him before, although, excuse me, I had not really watched him in any depth. But I did watch one of his sermons this week called God Has Not Forgotten You. And I thought he was excellent. I really did enjoy listening to his teaching. So thank you for pointing excuse me. So thank you for pointing those out to me. I really do appreciate it when you give me those tips. What I want to talk about today is the Gospel of Matthew, and specifically 3 remarkable things that are unique or nearly unique to the Gospel of Matthew. The first is, Matthew is, I don't know if I'd say it's broken into, but it contains 5 major teaching blocks. Matthew deliberately structures Jesus' teachings into 5 large discourses, each ending with the same formula. When, quote, when Jesus had finished saying these things, or similar wording. These 5 sections are the Sermon on the Mount in chapters 5 through 7, the Mission Discourse in chapter 10, the Parables of the Kingdom in chapter 13, Community Discourse in chapter 18, and the Olivet Discourse, Judgment, in chapters 24 through 25. So, the reason why I wanted to bring this up today is because far too often when we read the Bible, we just read it verse by verse and don't really give it much thought as far as the structure of the book goes and what the purpose of the writer might be. Of course, John tells you his purpose right at the beginning, but some of the other writers aren't quite as clear about that. And so I thought it would be nice to take a look at the Gospel of Matthew, and we will do Mark, Luke, and John as well, and just look at how Matthew structured his gospel, and that might tell us something about what his purpose was in writing to us. And so that's the reason why I'm bringing this up. This first one I think is fascinating. It's interesting that many scholars see this 5 major teachings as a deliberate parallel to the 5 books of Moses, presenting Jesus as the new authoritative teacher of God's people. So that's I'm always willing to listen to scholars and hear their thoughts and consider them carefully, but I don't necessarily, how should I put this? I don't necessarily take them for veracity. It's their opinion, and so their opinion is an educated one, that's for certain, but I don't think that it's authoritative, if you will. And so while I do listen to the scholars and think about what they say. I don't necessarily agree with them all the time. Sometimes I violently disagree with them with the conclusions that they come to. The second thing, remember we're talking about 3 remarkable things that are unique or nearly unique to the Gospel of Matthew. The second thing is that Matthew is the only gospel that uses the word church. In the Greek, that word is ekklesia, ekklesia. Excuse me. Out of the 4 Gospels, Matthew is the only one who uses the word church. That's kind of interesting to me. And he uses it in 2 places. In Matthew 16:18, where Jesus says, I will build my church. And then in Matthew 18:17, where he gives instructions about church discipline. We could go take a look at that just a second. Matthew 18:17. Okay. I'm going to I'm going to expand this to a little bit to give you some context. We're going to start in verse 15. And let me get on the right screen so you can see this as well and blow it up some. Let's see. Okay. If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won over your brother. If he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, so that every fact may be established on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Excuse me. If he refuses to listen to them, tell the church. If he refuses to listen even to the church, then treat him as you would a Gentile or a tax collector. Which is kind of funny when you think about it, because Matthew was a tax collector. So he knew exactly what he was talking about there. They hated tax collectors. They really did. But it's just kind of fascinating that he says, first you talk to the individual alone, just the 2 of you. If that doesn't work, then you bring 2 or 3 witnesses with you so that you can make sure that you have independent corroboration of what you're saying. And if that doesn't work, you take him to the church. Now, the Jews didn't call the synagogue church. Excuse me. They never used that term church. And so it's fascinating that Matthew does. It's kind of, in a way, you might think about it, it's a foreshadowing of what came to be after Christ's resurrection. And it's kind of interesting to me. The next thing that I want to bring up, excuse me, is, one other point I wrote down. This has led many to call Matthew the church's gospel, which is interesting. The third point, and this is, again, we're talking about 3 remarkable things that are unique or nearly unique to the Gospel of Matthew. The third thing is the strongest emphasis on fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy of any of the Gospels. Matthew contains more explicit fulfillment citations than any other Gospel, roughly a dozen clear ones, plus many more allusions. He repeatedly uses the formula, this was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. And he presents Jesus as the long-awaited Jewish Messiah who completes Israel's story. So clearly the target audience for his book was Jews. It was the people from Israel, because he was trying to convince them that Jesus was actually their Messiah. Excuse me. Goodness. Excuse me. Of course, many of the Jews rejected that claim and do today. But I think if you read the Old Testament, it's kind of hard to deny that he was the actual foretold Messiah. So that was the third thing, is the emphasis on fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. In other words, if you could think about it that way, proving to people that Jesus Christ was the Jewish Messiah, that he was the one who was called. And it appears we don't have anybody watching, so that's kind of interesting. I don't know what happened there. I'm pretty sure I'm live. Let me just double check. Let's see. Yeah, I'm live, so okay. So thank you for coming. And then there's one other thing of note about the gospel. There's probably many more than one, but one that I wanted to point out is the Matthew has the visit of the Magi, which no other gospel has, and he has also the only genealogy that includes women: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, the wife of Uriah, and Mary. And he's the only gospel that uses the phrase kingdom of heaven instead of kingdom of God. So those are things that when you're reading Matthew, you might want to keep those in mind and just think about them in the context of what you're reading, because they're important. Matthew wouldn't have written it this way if he didn't want you to be aware of it and note it. And as I say, in the coming weeks, in the coming weeks, we're going to go through Mark, Luke, and John as well, and do the same treatment with them. We're going to look for things that are unique to those books compared to the other ones. So that's what I had to share today. If anyone has any questions, I'd appreciate them asking them. I don't see anybody in the chat at all. I don't know if I'm doing that right. I'm just an old guy. I don't know if I do this stuff right or not. That's what I had to share today. If anyone has any questions, I'd appreciate them asking. Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see anybody in the chat at all. I don't know if I'm doing that right. Interesting. Well, if no one has any comments or questions, I'm going to end the live stream. This will be the fastest one I've ever done. I'll tell you what, I'll hang around for a few more minutes just to see if anybody has any questions. It's up to you. Excuse me. Let me get a drink of water. I had a fascinating conversation last week with a lady from Ireland who is an atheist, who asked me some questions, and we got into quite an interesting discussion. So that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. Excuse me. And then, of course, there was a kind of I don't know what you'd call it. I made it very clear that I do not believe that Jesus Christ is God. And so I had a guy who was, typical reaction to that was, yeah, I'll get to you in just a minute. Kind of a typical reaction to that, he was, oh, that's blasphemy. I'm going to pray for you. That's crazy talk. If you're interested in that, I have written a book. It's not published yet, but I'm currently looking for an agent, called The Nature of Christ, that addresses the topic in detail. So if you want a copy of that, I'll send you a free advance copy, PDF form, for your reading pleasure. So have I ever heard God speak to me before? Excuse me. I have never had an experience where I actually heard a voice external to my head, but I have had many conversations with God where he has answered me. And I'll give you one good example. Excuse me. This is a while ago. I was on a special Christian camping, that kind of thing. And one of the things that we did was we climbed cliffs. And I had never done that in my life. And so there was a guy there who I admired physically. I thought that he was in really good shape and very strong. Excuse me. And so I watched him very closely as he was climbing because my plan was to emulate him. Well, he fell 3 times. And so at that point, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt there was no way I was ever going to climb that cliff on my own. I just couldn't do it. I didn't have that skill, didn't have the training, didn't have the strength. And so when it was my turn, I tied on the rope at the base of the cliff, and I closed my eyes and I said, God, I cannot do this. You are going to have to show me what to do. And we had a little bit of training ahead of time about doing things like put your hand in a crack and then make a fist, and that will keep it from falling out, and that will help you climb. So I used those techniques that we were taught by the counselors, but I climbed from the bottom of that cliff to the top of the cliff without falling once. And there was a negative overhang in that climb. Basically what that is you're here and there's a rock sticking out over you. So you have to actually go out to the end of the rock and climb over it like that. It's very, very hard to do, is my understanding. Like I say, I've never climbed cliffs, so I didn't know. But I made it all the way to the top without falling once. And later on that day, we were hiking back to base camp, and one of the counselors slowed his walk down so that I would catch up to him. And when we got alongside each other, he said to me, so how long have you been climbing? And I said, I've never climbed in my life. I'm a total neophyte. Why do you ask? And he says, because you climbed that like a professional. And I said, you're kidding me. And he says, no. I said, well, I know why I did. And he says, why is that? I said, because I told God at the bottom of the cliff I couldn't do it, and he had to show me. And that's what he did. So for me personally, conversations with God are not like what you would assume is a normal conversation between two human beings where they're both speaking. It's more of a thought process. It's a mental conversation. But excuse me, I have had those conversations with God many times over the years, and that example of climbing the cliff is just one of many, many that I could give you, where I know for certain that God was talking to me, because I couldn't have come up with those ideas, those thoughts, or those actions on my own. I do know people who see visions. I know people who have heard God audibly speak to them. But, and that actually reminds me of something I had planned on talking about and then got away from. There's a website, I'll put the link in the description for you, that talks about types of learning styles. For every human being on earth, there are 4 distinct learning styles, and each person will have one of these. Visual, oral, as in hearing, kinesthetic, as in touching, and reading and writing. So that's how you learn. Excuse me. And each of us learns, each of us has a learning, what do I want to call that? Mode, I guess. A learning mode, a way of learning that is unique to us. And we can all do all 4. We can do visual, we can do oral, we can do kinesthetic, we can do reading and writing. But one of the 4 is the one that we will excel at, that we will learn the best and the most completely. And so for me, it's reading and writing. That's how I learn, by reading. So I do a lot of reading and writing. because that's how I learn. That's, not that I don't appreciate visual aids, but visual aids for me are sometimes not that interesting because that's not how I learn. So I hope that answers your question. Excuse me. My goodness. It's interesting that the ways that you learn oftentimes are the same ways that God will interact with you, because it's what makes sense to you, I guess. It makes the most sense that it's for you it's oral, or for you it's visual, where you see visions. God speaks to you in visions. He puts pictures in your head, and sometimes what we tend to call, humans tend to call apparitions in front of you. You can actually see, like watching a movie in front of you. If that's your mode of learning, then that's how God is going to interact with you, because he knows that that's the way that you'll respond the best. So I hope that answers your question. It's kind of interesting. Not as many people showed up this time as usual, which is, I don't know if it's the day or something's going on that I don't know about, but anyway. I do appreciate those of you who are watching and not interacting, coming and listening to me. And I especially appreciate, your question is that, what is that name? Rainbow. Were you trying to say rainbow trout? It's rainbow route. That's an interesting handle. Anyway. If there are no other questions or comments, I'm going to close out the live stream. I'll be back next week the same time, and we'll be doing the Gospel of Mark. So, before I go, I do want to pray for every single one of you. I thank God for you. I thank God that he's watching over you, that he's keeping you safe from harm, that he's protecting you from the evil one, and that he's keeping you healthy. And I thank God for doing that for every single person that you love as well. So until next week, Friday at 12 a.m. UTC, this is the Vietnam Era Vet, signing off.